Imagine this. You stand alone before a mirror in a dimly lit room. The silence is thick, the kind that hums in your ears, amplifying the sound of your own breathing. You stare at yourself. Not the curated version for the world, not the polished social mask, but the raw, unfiltered you. You whisper under your breath, "I love myself." But even as the words leave your mouth, they taste hollow, like a mantra you've been told to recite but never understood. A subtle tension coils in your chest. A voice within mutters, "Liar." Why? Why does the pursuit of self-love so often leave us lonelier, more fragmented, more fragile than before? Why does the culture that promises healing sometimes deepen the wound? Look around. The world is awash in declarations of self-love. Social feeds drip with glossy affirmations. You are enough. Just love yourself. Treat yourself like royalty. It's a tidal wave of positivity, a cultural drumbeat that insists if you could just love yourself hard enough, everything would fall into place. Your anxieties, your failures, your gnawing sense of emptiness. And yet, beneath this shimmering surface, the statistics tell another story. Depression is climbing. Anxiety is no longer an affliction of the few, but a watermark of an entire generation. Loneliness has reached epidemic levels, even as our voices flood the digital ether with cries of self-celebration. What if the very prescription we've been sold, love yourself always and unconditionally, is part of the disease? Imagine standing on the edge of a vast canyon. Across the chasm is the version of you you're told to love. Confident, radiant, unbothered, healed. Between you and that figure stretches an abyss of insecurity, grief, unresolved trauma, unmet longings. You're told, just jump the gap, just love yourself over it. But what if self-love, as we've come to understand it, is not the bridge, but the veil over the canyon? What if it blinds you to the abyss, paints over the fractures, sedates the ache that could have led you to a deeper awakening? Consider this paradox. The more you tell yourself you are enough, the more you subtly reinforce the belief that, left untouched, you are not. The more you chant affirmations in the mirror, the more you divide yourself into two. The speaker and the one who must be convinced. The parent and the child. The sculptor and the clay. You split. You fracture. Carl Jung once warned that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Yet the gospel of self-love preaches light without shadow, healing without wounding, worthiness without the bitter pilgrimage into the self's darkest corridors. What if the parts of you you've been told to love are the very parts you've never dared to understand? What if the self you are coaxed into embracing is not your authentic being, but a performative construct, a mask stitched together by social validation, consumerist desires, and curated identity? What if, in the relentless pursuit of self-love, you have lost touch with the primal, wounded, unfiltered core of your existence? You may begin to sense it now. The friction, the dissonance, the quiet despair of chasing after a version of yourself you do not yet recognize. You stand before the mirror, whispering love, but your shadow laughs in the background. The abandoned grief, the untended rage, the neglected fears. They are not healed by mantras. They are not wooed by slogans. They demand confrontation, not comfort. Why have we built an entire culture on soothing ourselves instead of knowing ourselves? And more urgently, what does it cost a person to be at war with their own pain, forever pushing it away under the banner of love? Nietzsche wrote that one must still have chaos within to give birth to a dancing star. But chaos terrifies the self-love generation. We've been trained to sanitize, to perfect, to endlessly manage the self until nothing raw remains. We have traded the aliveness of wholeness for the numbness of curated positivity. Where does this path lead? Does it not spiral toward deeper alienation, toward a kind of inner censorship, where only the acceptable parts of you are permitted to survive? Imagine waking up one morning and realizing that the love you have been taught to cultivate was never meant for the whole of you, but only for the mask you show the world. Imagine standing in that mirror and facing the unbearable question, what if I have been loving the wrong self all along? This is where the fracture begins to split wide open, where the heart starts to tremble with a terrible recognition. And it is here, in the tension between the comfort we seek and the discomfort we need, that the real journey begins. The hidden problem awaits, and it is darker, older, and far more seductive than you think. Beneath the shimmering surface of self-love culture, a hidden mechanism operates, one as old as human consciousness itself. It whispers, it shapes, it wounds, and it seduces. But it does not heal. Imagine peeling back the glossy language of affirmations, the Instagrammable mantras, the soft pastel aesthetics of modern self-help. Beneath it, you find something primitive, coiled like a serpent in the dark, the insatiable hunger to be enough. But where did this hunger come from? And why, despite all efforts, does it seem to deepen the more we feed it? To understand, we must journey backward, into the labyrinth of the psyche, into the chambers of history, and into the philosophical swamps where thinkers like Carl Jung, Nietzsche, Schopenhauer, and Sartre once wandered, wrestling with the mystery of human suffering. Jung believed the psyche is not a singular entity, but a constellation of opposing forces, the persona and the shadow, the conscious ego and the unconscious depths. The persona, our mask to the world, is crafted to win approval, belonging, and survival. But what happens when self-love becomes just another extension of this persona, another role to perform? Instead of confronting the shadow, the rejected, hidden, disowned parts of ourselves, we polish the persona, making it more radiant, more affirming, more lovable. We declare, I am enough, but what we mean is, my persona is enough. The shadow, meanwhile, is left to rot in silence, festering in resentment and neglect. Here lies the first fracture. True love of the self would require an encounter with everything within us, our rage, our jealousy, our pettiness, our grief, our longing. It would require what Jung called individuation, the lifelong process of integrating the unconscious into consciousness, of becoming whole. But wholeness is terrifying. It demands you hold paradox without resolution, that you stand face to face with your inner chaos without immediately trying to fix or sanitize it. Yet we live in a culture addicted to anesthesia. Arthur Schopenhauer, the philosopher of pessimism, saw life as an endless cycle of striving and dissatisfaction. Human beings, he argued, are driven by a blind will to live, a restless craving that leaves us perpetually dissatisfied. The self-love movement, in this light, becomes a new form of craving, a craving for the feeling of adequacy, a craving to feel worthy, to silence the gnawing sense of lack. But you cannot quiet Schopenhauer's will with a hashtag. You cannot tame the abyss with a scented candle or a self-help book. The will feeds on wanting, and the more we obsess over loving ourselves, the more we reinforce the very hunger we hope to silence. And then there's Nietzsche, the philosopher of suspicion, the heretic of all easy answers. Nietzsche would have scoffed at the tender sentimentalism of self-love culture. To him, growth was born not of comfort, but of confrontation with suffering. He called for the creation of the Übermensch, the overman who rises by transmuting pain into strength, by affirming life's chaos, not smoothing it over. In a world that preaches unconditional self-acceptance, Nietzsche might ask, what about the parts of you that need to be overcome? Not hated, not repressed, but confronted, wrestled with, reshaped. Where is the space in the gentle gospel of self-love for ruthless self-honesty? Where is the space for metamorphosis? Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, pointed to another trap. For Sartre, freedom was a curse and a blessing, because with freedom comes the unbearable burden of shaping one's own essence. There is no fixed self, only the choices we make, the actions we take, the meanings we create. But self-love culture often encourages us to treat the self as a fixed object, something to be massaged, protected, and worshipped, rather than a process in constant becoming. Instead of awakening to radical freedom, we collapse into identity maintenance. Instead of shaping the self through courageous engagement with the world, we retreat into the echo chamber of our own affirmation loops. At its psychological root, the self-love obsession is tangled with the core human fear. Am I acceptable as I am? From childhood, we navigate a social terrain littered with conditions: conditional approval, conditional affection, conditional worth. The child learns to split. Here is the part of me that gets love. Here is the part I must exile. Over time, this exile becomes second nature. We no longer even feel the pain of it. It becomes a silent architecture under the surface of identity. But the shadow does not die. It watches, it waits. When self-love culture arrives, promising to heal this wound, it often addresses only the symptom, not the cause. It tells you to embrace yourself, but only the curated version. It hands you tools to soothe the split, but not to dissolve it. And so, the fundamental fracture remains untouched. Aldous Huxley warned of a dystopia not of terror, but of distraction. A future where people would come to love their servitude, to delight in their own oppression. Today's self-love culture risks becoming such a soft tyranny, a tyranny of positivity, a dictatorship of curated happiness, a system where we medicate our alienation with doses of affirmation, never asking why we are alienated in the first place. Viktor Frankl, the Holocaust survivor and psychiatrist, saw that meaning, not happiness, is the foundation of a fulfilled life. But meaning arises through struggle, through responsibility, through aligning oneself with something greater than one's own comfort. Without this orientation, self-love risks collapsing into a shallow exercise in self-soothing, a desperate attempt to feel okay without ever asking what for. And so, you are left with the architecture of a modern dilemma. A culture that tells you to love yourself, a psychology that splits you in half, a philosophy that warns you that love without shadow, without chaos, without responsibility, is no love at all. You begin to glimpse the hidden problem. But the real price of this deception has not yet been fully revealed. Because when you suppress your shadow, when you medicate your pain, when you slip into the narcotic trance of self-affirmation, you pay in currency far more valuable than comfort. You pay with your very humanity. What happens when an entire culture amputates its own depths? When individuals turn away from the dark mirror, when the shadow is no longer integrated, but denied? We are about to enter dangerous terrain. Prepare yourself. The unseen consequences are waiting. Imagine this. You stand before a mirror, whispering words you've been told will heal you. I am enough. I am worthy. I am whole. But something inside you twitches, a subtle, nearly imperceptible discomfort. It's the voice you've been trying to silence. It's the shadow pressing its hand against the glass, watching you from the other side. And while you chant these mantras, the shadow smiles. Because it knows the more you pretend it's not there, the stronger it becomes. The great lie of self-love culture is that the psyche can be pacified with pleasant words. But the human mind is not a surface to be polished. It is a labyrinth, a living ecosystem of instincts, fears, memories, and longings. When we plaster over that ecosystem with affirmations, we don't heal it, we suffocate it. Psychologically, this suppression creates a profound fragmentation. Carl Jung warned that what we resist does not disappear, it returns, amplified. The shadow, he said, is not merely personal darkness, but the totality of the repressed, denied, and disowned. Ignore it, and it leaks out sideways, in passive aggression, envy, projection, addiction, or even cruelty toward others. Imagine trying to love yourself while secretly despising your jealousy, your anger, your selfishness, your weakness. What happens? You split. You create two selves, the self you love and the self you exile. And because the exile never goes away, you live in a constant state of inner civil war. But the consequences go deeper. Neuroscience tells us that the brain is wired for integration. The prefrontal cortex helps regulate emotion. The limbic system processes threat and pleasure. The hippocampus integrates memory and experience. When we deny or suppress parts of our experience, we create neural dissonance. Instead of calming the nervous system, shallow self-love practices can increase the very anxiety they aim to soothe. Why? Because the body knows what the mind denies. You can stand in front of the mirror all day telling yourself you are safe, you are enough, you are whole. But if your nervous system still registers buried grief, unprocessed trauma, or existential dread, you will feel like a liar to yourself. The cognitive dissonance between surface affirmation and deep truth becomes unbearable. This is why so many people report feeling worse after immersing themselves in self-help culture. Not better. The glittering promises of self-love become cruel mockeries when they fail to touch the raw nerve of real suffering. Socially, the consequences ripple outward. We have crafted a culture obsessed with presentation. Social media amplifies this obsession to a fever pitch. Filtered images, curated identities, performances of joy, confidence, and wholeness. But beneath the spectacle lies a quiet epidemic of alienation. Jean-Paul Sartre wrote that hell is other people, not because others are inherently tormenting, but because we are trapped in the gaze of others, constantly performing, constantly aware of being seen. Self-love culture, when hijacked by social media, becomes yet another stage upon which we must perform adequacy. You are no longer simply living, you are curating your healing, showcasing your progress, demonstrating your transformation. And here's the tragedy. The more you perform wellness, the lonelier you become, because somewhere inside, you know that no one is seeing the real you. And worse, you are no longer seeing the real you either. Cognitive biases compound this trap. Take the false consensus effect, the tendency to overestimate how much others agree with or resemble us. In the context of self-love culture, we assume everyone else has bought into the same ideals, the same practices, the same promises. So when we struggle, when we fail to feel the promised peace, we blame ourselves, not the culture. Or consider the backfire effect, where presenting people with evidence against their beliefs only strengthens their attachment to those beliefs. The more we question self-love dogma, the more we cling to it, doubling down, tripling our efforts, chanting louder, buying more books, scheduling more workshops, all in the desperate hope that this time it will work. But it doesn't, because the system is designed to fail. The most profound consequence, however, is existential. By turning inward in a culture of hyper-individualism, we risk severing the very lifeline that could save us, connection. True healing, as Gabor Maté argues, happens not in isolation, but in relationship. Trauma is not only what happened to you, but what happens inside you as a result. A disconnection from self, from others, from the world. When self-love becomes an isolated project, we cut ourselves off from the medicine of belonging. We forget that we were never meant to carry the burden of wholeness alone. Nietzsche's great warning was against nihilism, the collapse of meaning when old values are stripped away. In a world where religion has receded, where community is fragmented, where tradition is weakened, we are told to become our own source of love, meaning, and validation. But this is too much to ask of a human soul. Without something larger, a transcendent horizon, a community of care, a purpose beyond self-maintenance, the project collapses inward. We become like stars imploding into black holes, radiant on the surface, but collapsing in the core. There is another price. The suppression of the shadow on an individual level echoes outward into collective life. A society obsessed with positive thinking, with curating happiness, with managing identity, becomes brittle, incapable of reckoning with its own injustices, its own failures, its own darkness. We see this in political polarization, in the intolerance of dissent, in the inability to hold grief collectively. Because when you have no inner capacity to face shadow, you have no outer capacity to face reality. And reality, as it turns out, is dark, messy, tragic, and beautiful all at once. So here we stand, a culture meditating in front of the mirror, whispering self-affirmations, while the house quietly burns behind it. The unseen consequences are not minor side effects. They are the price of disowning the depths, and they are gathering momentum. But here's the secret the self-love gurus rarely tell you. The cure to this malaise is not more affirmation. It is confrontation. It is rebellion. It is the audacity to break the trance, to shatter the mirror, to step beyond the confines of curated identity. And that, the rebellion, is where we must go next. Are you ready? Imagine this. You're standing at the edge of a vast ocean. For years, you've been told to build a boat of affirmations, mantras, positive thinking. You were promised that if you just loved yourself hard enough, you'd sail smoothly across the turbulent waves of life. But no one told you the sea has no intention of calming down. The waves are not here to drown you. They are here to wake you up. And one day, something inside you snaps. You drop the hammer. You stop building the boat. You walk straight into the water, without protection, without illusion, without the crutch of endless self-soothing. For the first time, you meet yourself raw, and you realize, this is what freedom tastes like. The rebellion begins when you stop trying to fix yourself, not because you are perfect, not because you have no wounds, but because you finally understand. You were never supposed to be flawless. Human beings are not machines to be optimized or products to be perfected. We are contradictions wrapped in skin. We carry longing and shame, beauty and brutality, selfishness and sacrifice, all entangled in one psyche. Carl Jung called this process individuation, not the achievement of perfection, but the integration of opposites. The task is not to destroy the shadow, but to make peace with it. The rebellion, then, is radical acceptance. But let's be clear, acceptance is not complacency. To accept is not to passively surrender. It is to look into the mirror without flinching. To say, yes, I am jealous. Yes, I am terrified of rejection. Yes, I am petty and small and sometimes cruel. And then to ask, what is this part of me trying to teach me? This shift moves us from shame to dialogue, from condemnation to curiosity. Instead of crushing parts of ourselves, we begin to listen to them. And in that listening, something astonishing happens. The parts we feared most soften, transform, evolve. The moment you stop fighting your fear begins to loosen its grip. The moment you turn toward your anger reveals its secret longing for justice, for boundaries, for protection. Historically, the people who shattered their mental prisons were not those who obsessed over loving themselves. They were the ones who embraced the full catastrophe of being human. Nietzsche called for the birth of the Übermensch, not a cold superhuman, but a person who has transcended resentment, who has said yes to life in all its agony and ecstasy. Dostoyevsky's Raskolnikov collapses under the weight of his guilt not because he is evil, but because he cannot bear the truth of his own fallibility. Only confession, only raw confrontation with his darkness, brings the chance of redemption. The Stoics, too, rebelled not through self-worship, but through self-discipline, by remembering their mortality, by facing discomfort, by focusing on what they could control and releasing the rest. These figures didn't escape suffering. They walked into its mouth and came out changed. Practically, what does this rebellion look like today? It begins with silence. Turn off the noise. Step away from the endless scroll of curated lives, of motivational noise, of perfectly packaged self-help. Find a room, close the door, sit down, then ask yourself, what am I unwilling to feel? What am I avoiding in myself? What have I banished to the edge of my consciousness? Write it down, speak it aloud, bring it into the light. Next, embrace what Viktor Frankl called meaning over happiness. Frankl, a survivor of Auschwitz, understood something most modern wellness gurus have forgotten. We do not thrive by chasing comfort. We thrive by anchoring ourselves to purpose. Instead of asking, how can I feel better? Ask, what demands to be done? What calls me to serve something larger than myself? Where can my pain become fuel for action, for creation, for connection? This shift from self-indulgence to self-transcendence shatters the prison of narcissistic self-love. It reconnects you to the web of life, to the needs of others, to the demands of history, to the longing for justice. Another revolutionary act, cultivate relationships that pierce the mask. Find people who will not let you perform. People who challenge your defenses, who name your evasions, who mirror your blind spots without cruelty, but with ruthless compassion. Healing is not a solo endeavor. It is forged in the furnace of relationship. Therapists, mentors, spiritual teachers, old friends who have seen your ugliest moments. These are the midwives of transformation. Finally, embrace the art of falling apart. The great paradox is this: only when you allow yourself to break do you discover what cannot be broken. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great pessimist, believed life was suffering. But hidden within his bleak vision was a strange liberation. When we stop expecting the world to satisfy us, we become free to engage with it authentically. The rebellion is not about armoring yourself against pain. It is about meeting life naked, knowing you will be cut and bruised, and still extending your hands toward it. Rebellion does not look like constant affirmation. It looks like standing in front of the ruins of your life and saying, I will begin again. Not because I am whole, not because I am unbreakable, but because I am alive. To break free, you must unlearn the language of perfection. You must trade the pursuit of constant positivity for the sacred art of bearing reality. And when you do, something ancient stirs inside you. The part that was never fooled by the glittering promises. The part that always knew there is no easy salvation. This is the rebel's gift, not peace, but aliveness. Not comfort, but awakening. You do not need to become perfect. You only need to become real. So as the old world crumbles, as the temples of false self-love collapse, you will stand among the ruins, breathing the cold air, feeling the weight of your own fragile, luminous existence. And from that place, the final realization awaits. Prepare yourself. Imagine this. You are alone in a dark room. The walls are bare, the windows sealed, and the only sound is your breath echoing back to you. You have tried everything, the affirmations, the rituals, the desperate clinging to self-love mantras. But now, stripped of your tools, you sit in the raw silence of your own existence, and something terrifying happens. The silence does not comfort you, it confronts you. Suddenly, you realize there is no voice coming to rescue you. No cosmic approval, no final seal of worthiness descending from the heavens. For the first time, you understand the truth you have been running from all along. There is no final version of you to arrive at. This is the ultimate paradox. The very chase to fix yourself is the thing keeping you divided. The very hunger for unconditional self-love is the thing that keeps you starving. The very project of becoming whole fractures you into pieces. Because beneath the desire for self-love, there is a deeper wound, the illusion that you were ever separate from life, from others, from the vast, tangled web of existence. You were never meant to love yourself in isolation. You were meant to dissolve the idea of a self that stands apart from the world. Friedrich Nietzsche once wrote, "One must still have chaos in oneself to be able to give birth to a dancing star." But here's what they rarely tell you about chaos. It is not a temporary phase on the way to order. It is the ongoing state of life. There is no arrival point where you will finally be clean, still, perfect. There is only the deepening capacity to stand in the storm without needing the storm to end. Jean-Paul Sartre called this existence preceding essence. The idea that you are not born with a fixed nature, not bound by an essential self you must discover or perfect. You create yourself, moment by moment, choice by choice. And you are free, but that freedom is dizzying. Because it means you are responsible for creating meaning in a world that offers none pre-packaged. This is the weight of being human, and this is the freedom hidden inside the failure of self-love culture. You do not need to be loved by yourself in order to live fully. You need to engage with life, with others, with the mystery of being. In the writings of Viktor Frankl, we find a profound key. Those who have a why to live can bear almost any how. Frankl, imprisoned in the horrors of a concentration camp, did not survive by focusing on loving himself. He survived by focusing on the thread of meaning that bound him to life. His love for his wife, his commitment to his work, his refusal to let the Nazis dictate the meaning of his suffering. And here lies the profound realization. Your life will not be saved by self-adoration. It will be saved by the meanings you create, the connections you forge, the responsibilities you choose to carry. Gabor Maté teaches us that addiction, whether to substances, work, success, or even self-help, is not rooted in weakness, but in pain. And what heals pain is not performance, but presence. Not the perfect self, but the present self. Not the curated self, but the connected self. The deep medicine you have been seeking does not sound like, "I love myself unconditionally." It sounds like, "I am here, and I will not abandon myself in this moment." That is the true act of rebellion. To stay, to face the ache without running, to meet your trembling heart with the simple, steady commitment, "I will not look away." Look closer and you will see that even the philosophers we revere, the sages we quote, were not models of flawless self-love. Nietzsche was tormented by isolation. Jung wrestled with terrifying visions and deep conflict. Schopenhauer spiraled into cynicism and despair. Dostoyevsky nearly faced a firing squad and survived exile in Siberia. They were cracked, wild, haunted, and because of that, they touched something real. They wrote not from sanitized self-acceptance, but from intimate knowledge of human frailty. And here is the beautiful, unsettling truth. You don't need to overcome your wounds to touch wisdom. You need to enter them, not to wallow, not to glorify pain, but to harvest the insights only suffering can reveal. So now, sitting in that dark room, what happens? A soft realization dawns. There is no light switch, but there is a door. It was never locked. And when you stand up, when you reach out, when you walk into the vast, trembling world, you are not walking out as someone who has finally learned to love themselves. You are walking out as someone who has stopped making self-love a condition for showing up. You are free to be messy. You are free to be unfinished. You are free to belong, not because you have earned it, but because belonging was never about merit. The deepest realization is this: you are not here to complete yourself. You are here to participate, to hold hands with your own contradiction, to laugh at your own absurdity, to weep at the beauty of a world that breaks and heals and breaks again. You will never arrive at peace, but you can live in such a way that peace finds you in flashes, when you are immersed in the work, the love, the conversation, the gaze, the grief. Self-love, as we have been sold it, is too small a goal for a creature as vast as you. So go, not in search of a better mirror, but in search of a deeper encounter with life. And when the waves rise, when the storm howls, when your reflection shatters, remember, you were never the mirror. You were the ocean.